Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the unopened envelope in her hands. It was from the hospital. Her mother, Linda, had been getting worse by the day. The last test results would confirm what the doctors feared. But Emily already knew. She could see it in her mother's eyes, in her growing weakness, in the quiet way she said, "I'm fine," when she clearly wasn't. Life in Cincinnati had never been easy for them. Emily worked 2 jobs, at a bookstore during the day and waiting tables at night, just to keep food on the table. Her mother had raised her alone after her father walked out when she was a child. Now, at 27, Emily felt like she was racing against time, trying to hold everything together while the world fell apart around her. The bills kept piling up. The medications, the treatments, the specialist visits, everything was out of reach. And her mother, too proud to ask for help, refused to let Emily start a fundraiser. Then came the call. It was late afternoon when her manager at the cafe told her someone wanted to see her. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. A man in a dark suit stood beside a black car. He looked out of place in their quiet neighborhood. "Miss Collins?" he asked. "My name is Thomas Bennett. I represent Mr. Richard Evans." Emily blinked. She didn't recognize the name. "May I have a moment of your time?" They sat on a bench outside. Thomas was polite, calm, and spoke like someone used to making deals. He explained that Mr. Evans was a wealthy man in his late 60s, living in upstate New York. He was battling terminal cancer and had been given only a few months to live. What he wanted, Thomas said, was simple: someone to marry him. Not for love, not for companionship, but for dignity. He wanted someone to take care of him in his final days, to share his name, to hold his hand when it ended. In exchange, he would provide financial support for that person's family. Emily was speechless. "It would be a legal arrangement," Thomas continued, discreet, respectful, and generous. She felt a wave of confusion, disbelief, and guilt. It sounded heartless, but it also sounded like salvation. That night, she sat beside her mother's bed and watched her sleep. Her hand was cold, her breathing shallow. Emily knew what she had to do. The next morning, she called Thomas back. "I'll do it," she said quietly, "but I want everything in writing." 2 weeks later, she stood in a courthouse in Albany, wearing a borrowed dress and holding the arm of a stranger. Richard Evans was thinner than she expected, but his eyes were warm. He didn't look like a man making a deal. He looked tired and kind. They said their vows with few words. No guests, no photos, no ring. Just papers signed and quiet acceptance. Emily moved into his house the next day, a large, quiet place surrounded by trees. The staff had been dismissed. Richard wanted peace, not pity. And Emily, with no training, learned to care for him, preparing meals, adjusting his medication, helping him walk. They spoke little at first, but slowly, over cups of tea and long afternoons, a bond began to form. Richard asked about her childhood. She told him about riding bikes with her cousins, about books she loved, about her mother's laugh. He listened, and then he shared too, about his years as a lawyer, about regrets he carried, about the brother he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. It wasn't love, not the kind in movies, but it was something real. Emily called her mother every night. The treatments had started. They were expensive, but working. Her voice sounded stronger, brighter. For the first time in years, Emily felt a strange sense of calm. Until Richard collapsed one morning in the hallway. She screamed his name, called an ambulance, and held his hand all the way to the hospital. He was conscious, but barely. The cancer had spread further. Time was running out. At his bedside, he whispered, "Thank you, Emily, for giving me peace." She wept silently. 1 week later, Richard passed away. Emily stood alone at his funeral. No family came. Only the lawyer Thomas was there. And as they lowered the casket, she felt something unexpected. Grief. Not just for him, but for the strange, quiet love that never had time to grow. She returned home to Cincinnati, thinking it was all behind her. But the letter from the lawyer arrived just 3 weeks later, and what it said would change everything. Emily returned to Cincinnati with a quiet heart and a heavy mind. Her mother, Linda, was recovering well. The treatments were working, and the relief on her face every time she saw Emily made every sacrifice worth it. But Emily felt changed. Something inside her had shifted during those months in Albany. Richard Evans was gone, but the memory of his gentle voice and the silence they shared still echoed in her. 3 weeks later, Thomas Bennett, the same lawyer who first approached her, called again. "There's something we need to discuss," he said. They met at a small cafe downtown. Thomas handed her an envelope, thicker than the others. Inside were legal documents and a letter from Richard. "Emily," the letter read, "if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer by your side. But I want you to know you gave me peace. I know we started this journey as strangers, but you became family. I've left something for you, not because of duty, but because you gave me kindness when I had nothing left." Richard had left everything to her. His house, his remaining assets, even a savings account meant to support her and her mother for years. Emily froze. She hadn't expected this. The deal had ended with his death. She never asked for more, never even thought about it. "I can't accept all of this," she told Thomas. He nodded. "You can, and he wanted you to. No one else claimed him, no family, no children. You were the only one who stayed." Emily didn't know what to say. She returned home and sat with the documents for hours. Her mother, sitting beside her, squeezed her hand. "You did what you had to do," Linda said softly. "You gave someone peace. And now, maybe it's time to find yours." Emily decided to keep only part of the inheritance. The rest she donated anonymously to a cancer foundation in Richard's name. But something had awakened in her, a longing to create something meaningful, something more than just surviving. She used a small portion of the money to start a community project, a center for women like her, struggling, overwhelmed, trying to care for loved ones while barely staying afloat. She called it the Willow House, named after the tree in Richard's backyard, under which they often sat in silence. She rented a modest building in the outskirts of Cincinnati and began hosting weekly support meetings. At first, only 2 women showed up, then 4, then 10. They shared stories of pain and courage. And slowly, Emily found purpose. Meanwhile, her relationship with her mother deepened. They cooked together again. They laughed. Linda's health, though still fragile, improved every day. But not everything was peaceful. One morning, Emily received a letter from Richard's estranged brother, Charles Evans, a powerful businessman from Chicago. He demanded an investigation into the inheritance, claimed she manipulated a dying man, that she married for money, and tricked his brother in his final days. The accusation hit Emily like a storm. Charles hired attorneys, filed motions, threatened to freeze all accounts. Thomas assured her everything was legal, properly signed, witnessed, but Emily couldn't sleep. The whispers around town started. Some people looked at her differently. Even one of the women from the support group stopped coming. Emily tried to keep strong, but it was too much. The project stalled. Her mother grew anxious. The past she thought was behind her was now poisoning her present. She received a court summons. Charles was pushing for a hearing. On the night before the hearing, Emily sat alone in her bedroom, staring at an old sketchbook she had kept since college. She used to draw faces, places, dreams. She hadn't touched it in years. She opened it and saw the first drawing she ever made of her mother, smiling, full of life. She flipped through the pages and found herself again, piece by piece. That night, she made a decision. She would not run, not hide, not apologize for the kindness she gave. She stood before the judge the next morning, calm but firm. "Yes, I married Richard Evans," she said. "Yes, it was a legal agreement, but it became more than that. I was there when no one else was. I gave him peace, And he gave me trust. I didn't steal a thing. I earned his faith. The judge listened. Charles tried to interrupt. The lawyers argued. But in the end, the ruling stood. The will was valid. Emily walked out of that courtroom not as a widow of convenience, but as a woman who had survived judgment and proven her truth. Back home, she reopened the Willow House. More women returned, new faces arrived, and Emily, for the first time in years, began drawing again. Autumn came with a strange heaviness. The leaves turned gold and red across Cincinnati, but Emily felt more uncertain than ever. Though the court had validated Richard's will and cleared her name, something inside her remained unsettled. Public judgment wasn't easy to erase. Even after the legal victory, some neighbors still whispered. Her story had reached local newspapers, and headlines like "widow" or "opportunist" only deepened the wound. She stopped going out as often. The Willow House kept her busy, but the joy that once filled the rooms had dulled. She smiled for the women, but behind closed doors, she cried quietly at night. Her mother noticed. Linda, though much stronger now, worried about her daughter's silence. Emily shrugged it off. "I'm just tired," she'd say. But it wasn't just fatigue. It was loneliness, guilt, confusion. One evening, as Emily locked up the community center, a familiar voice called her name. "Emily?" She turned and saw a man approaching. Mid-30s, tall, with gentle eyes and worn-out jeans. His name was Daniel Harris, a carpenter who had once volunteered to help renovate the Willow House in its early days. They hadn't spoken in months. "I heard about what happened," he said. "I wanted to reach out, but I wasn't sure if you wanted to be found." Emily looked away. "It's been a mess." Daniel nodded. "If you ever want to talk, I'm still around." She didn't answer. But something in his voice stayed with her. That night, Emily opened a drawer she hadn't touched since Richard's death. Inside was the letter he left her, worn from being reread so many times. "You are more than this agreement," it said. "You are capable of building something real, something lasting. Don't forget that." Days passed. Emily focused on the center. Daniel returned one afternoon, unannounced, with tools in hand. "You said the front step was loose," he said. "Figured I'd take a look." She didn't stop him. He kept coming, fixing a shelf here, painting a wall there. Eventually, they started talking again. About small things, books, recipes, funny stories from their childhoods. There were no grand declarations, no sparkly moments, just comfort. Until one evening, Daniel asked gently, "Did you love him?" Emily paused. "I don't know if it was love," she said, "but it was real. We didn't have time to figure it out." He nodded, understanding. Sometimes the deepest connections don't need a name. Their conversations grew longer. He joined some of the support group sessions, fixing coffee or sharing his own quiet stories of loss. A sister he'd lost to illness, a father who never returned from war. The women trusted him. Emily began to trust again, too. But then came the second letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a photo, Emily at the courthouse. Next to it, a cutout from a tabloid. The gold digger widow? And one line, handwritten, "The truth always comes out." Emily's hands shook. Who sent this? Charles Evans had disappeared after losing the case. Could it be him or someone else? She didn't tell anyone, not even Daniel. Fear crept back in. Was she being watched? Was her past going to keep haunting her forever? The next day, the front window of the Willow House was smashed. No note, no message, just shattered glass and the echo of a threat. Emily reported it to the police, but there were no fingerprints, no leads. She tried to stay strong, but the women at the center saw the fear in her eyes. And when one of them, a young mother named Rachel, broke down in tears, saying, "If they're going after you, what about the rest of us?" Emily knew something had to change. She stood in front of the group that night, voice steady despite her fear. "I don't know who's trying to silence us," she said, "but I won't be quiet. We built this place together, and we'll keep building." That night, they all stayed to clean, board up the window, and repaint the wall. Daniel brought pizza. Her mother brought warm blankets. And for the first time in weeks, Emily laughed. But later, when she returned home, another envelope waited at her door. This one was heavier. Inside was a flash drive and a note. "Watch this, then decide what you really know about Richard Evans." Emily stared at the flash drive resting in her palm. It felt cold, heavier than it should have been. She didn't know what she was about to uncover, but something inside her whispered that once she saw what was on it, she could never go back. She waited until her mother was asleep. Then, alone in her bedroom, she plugged it into her laptop. One single video file popped up. She clicked. The footage was old, grainy. Richard Evans sat at a desk in what looked like his study in Albany. He looked thin, pale, clearly during the final months of his life. But his eyes were sharp, his voice firm. "If you're watching this," he began, "someone is trying to rewrite my story." Emily leaned forward. "I wasn't a perfect man," Richard continued. "I made mistakes, pushed people away. My brother Charles? He hated me for leaving the company. He always believed I owed him something. And maybe I did, but not my peace." He paused, breathing slowly. "I married Emily because I was dying, but she gave me dignity. She didn't lie to me, didn't flatter me. She saw me as I was, and that meant more to me than anyone will ever understand." Then his eyes softened. "I leave her everything because she earned it, not through romance or duty, but through humanity. So if you're questioning her, maybe you should be questioning your own heart." The video ended. Emily sat in silence. The doubt, the fear, the voices that had haunted her, they finally faded. Richard had spoken his truth, and it was enough. She sent a copy of the video to her lawyer and the police. The harassment stopped soon after. No more letters, no more broken windows. Charles Evans never resurfaced. Months passed. The Willow House flourished. Donations increased after a local journalist shared Emily's story, including a clip from Richard's video. People saw her, really saw her, not as the woman who married for money, but as someone who stood through fire and never gave up. Daniel and Emily grew closer. There were no grand proposals, no candlelit confessions. Just days spent building shelves together and quiet nights sitting on the porch, talking about nothing and everything. One spring afternoon, Emily and Daniel took a small group of women from the center on a picnic. As they sat under a large oak tree, one of the women, Gloria, asked Emily, "Do you regret it? Everything that happened?" Emily looked up at the sky, thought for a moment, and then said, "No, not even a little. Because even in the darkest moments, I was becoming someone stronger, someone truer." The group sat in silence, the breeze gentle on their skin. Later that night, Emily opened her old sketchbook again. It was almost full now. Pages of women's faces, quiet corners of the community center, her mother's peaceful smile, and Daniel's laugh captured in pencil strokes. She flipped to the last page and drew a tree, not Richard's willow, but the oak they'd sat under that day. Solid, deep-rooted, still growing. That drawing became the new symbol of the Willow House, now known simply as the Oak. The center expanded to 2 new locations across Ohio. Emily trained new leaders, most of them women who had once come for help and now stood strong enough to help others. Her mother, Linda, lived another 3 years, peaceful, loved, and proud. When she passed, Emily found a letter tucked into her mother's Bible. "I never worried about you," it read, "because I knew you were made for more. Not because of the money, but because of your heart." Years later, Emily would look back and still feel the echoes of that time. She still missed Richard in quiet moments. still remembered that final cup of tea. But she never felt ashamed, never hid her story, because it wasn't a story of scandal. It was one of survival, of unexpected kindness, of learning to believe in yourself again, and of knowing that even when life begins with a transaction, it can still end in something real.